In late 1987, Square was facing a financial crisis, one that had them on the verge of bankruptcy. But by the same time the following year, they were ready to release a sequel to one of the most popular RPGs ever made. In this situation, it would be very tempting to repackage the game, making only a few minor tweaks to the system, and releasing what is virtually the same game with a different cover. This is what a lot of companies might have chosen to do. It's the safe, logical decision. Obviously, a formula had been discovered that people really liked, so why fix what isn't broken? For Square, it wasn't enough to simply release a sequel, though. It wasn't enough to copy the same formula and slap a new story over the top of it. Instead, Square attempted to revolutionize the RPG genre a second time. They took several steps forward, and a few backward in my opinion, but regardless of its mistakes, Final Fantasy II still stands as one of the most unique old-school RPGs of all time. The original game had absolutely exploded in Japan, and because of its success, Final Fantasy II was able to be released almost exactly 1 year later. This was both a good and a bad thing. It was a good thing, obviously, because we got another Final Fantasy game, and that's great. But the unfortunate part about the quick turnaround is that a single year isn't exactly ample time for the developers to fix all of the bugs that inevitably arise during game development. And that's a shame because conceptually, Final Fantasy II has some exceptional ideas. It has a completely overhauled character development structure, a totally reworked equipment system, and a number of added battle mechanics that were all really innovative. It's just unfortunate that Square didn't provide themselves with enough time to make these changes function properly. The game starts off with the four main characters, Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon, as they flee from Imperial soldiers. Luckily, 3 of them are rescued by a rebel faction. That's Firion, Maria, and Guy, while Leon is lost in the fray. Having lost their home to the Empire, and owing their lives to the rebels, the 3 decide that they want to enlist in the rebel army. But their request is swiftly denied by Princess Hilda, who deems them too young and inexperienced to fight. The party decides instead to go in search of their friend, but before setting out, the player is introduced to a really cool new gameplay mechanic. One of the most interesting features added to Final Fantasy II is its password system, which is required to advance the plot. So, for instance, when speaking with Hilda at the beginning of the game, she mentions a specific term, Wild Rose, which can be stored in a password inventory by using the learn command. After learning this password, it can be used to prompt other NPCs across the world to help in various ways, whether that be by joining the party temporarily, or by offering up a key item or information. As an early example of this, if the player makes his or her way back to Finn and says the password to this NPC guarding a secret passage, he'll allow the company through to meet Hilda's dying lover, who will in turn give an item that will convince her to allow the party to join the rebel army. I thought this was a brilliant addition to the game because it actually forces the player to pay attention to the text, to read a little bit more into just who these characters are and what role they play in the world. And there was none of that sort of thing in the original Final Fantasy. It was a really big step forward from a narrative standpoint because it actually gave you the sense that you were interacting with the story, that you had a role to play, that you had a say, so to speak, in the events that were going on in the world, rather than being solely inclined to interact with the game via its battle system. Another thing I really like about this game is that it actually has the courage to kill off playable characters. And yes, I said characters, plural. There are several characters that join your party in this game that end up dead. And that's a really big risk to take, especially for a game that was riding on the coattails of its predecessor's success. But I'm really glad that they decided to go through with it, because this game takes on a much more serious tone. And in my opinion, it works so well when the player is required to recruit characters from around the world, just regular citizens, who end up dead because of their involvement, and have to leave behind loved ones and other important responsibilities that the player actually got to see and understand. This, to me, added a layer of depth and a level of weight that is unrivaled by most other games in the series, and most other video games in general for that matter. Because the truth is that there's nothing fun or exciting about war. There are immense sacrifices that have to be made along the way that make the people involved question whether or not it's even worth it. There's nothing fun or glorious about being a war hero. Final Fantasy II's soundtrack is strong, and I mean really strong. There are some powerful pieces in this game, many of which moved me in a way that I didn't think was possible for an 8-bit soundtrack. I love all of these songs, but just a few to mention are the Rebel theme, the Overworld theme, the Mysidia Tower theme, and the Chocobo theme, which went on to be included in dozens of arrangements in every installment in the franchise afterward, and marked the first time the Golden Creatures appeared in the series. One of the major changes made to Final Fantasy II was the game's character progression formula. It's not an experience-based formula like most of the other games in the series. In Final Fantasy II, rather than upgrading your character's level, you upgrade each individual attribute of your characters. These attributes will increase or decrease depending on how you assign your characters to act in battle. So, for example, in the vast majority of RPGs out there, whether they're turn-based or not, you receive experience in battle that leads to your character's next level up. Many times, depending on a number of factors, after a character levels up, points are automatically assigned into his or her attributes. Now, there are several modern RPGs like Mass Effect or Dark Souls that give the player control over how to spend these points. But there's one factor about these types of leveling systems that bother me a little bit. In Demon Souls, or Dark Souls for example, I can take my character around and use nothing but magic-based attacks to farm experience, but then choose to place my experience points into an attribute like Strength or Vitality. In practice, I didn't actually exercise any strength or vitality to defeat the enemies I faced, but I can still get physically stronger regardless of that fact. While I love the customizable level progression in these games, and while admittedly it fits the storyline of sacrificing souls in order to get stronger, it's still interesting to me that there aren't many RPGs out there that award experience to specific attributes as those attributes are practiced. The Elder Scrolls is one example, but I can't think of many more. In Final Fantasy II, however, if you want to increase your strength, you have to use physical attacks. You have to take hits if you want to increase your vitality, and you have to cast spells if you want to increase your intelligence or your soul. On the other hand, you're going to lose points in the attributes that you don't exercise. You also have to level up weapon skills and spells by using them. There are several different weapon types in the game, including swords, spears, axes, canes, knives, bows, etc., that have to be leveled up individually for each character. It takes 100 uses of a specific weapon type in battle to level up a character's skill with that weapon, and the same goes for spells. Now, I think this is a pretty brilliant idea for an RPG character progression system. It's intuitive, it forces you to develop a group of characters strategically, and it makes a lot of sense. But it does make leveling up take an extremely long time, and so the developers tried to compensate by driving the enemy encounter rate through the freaking roof, which made exploring dungeons incredibly tedious and frustrating. Also, because of how long it takes to level up magic, you might tend to ignore using some of the late game spells, which are supposed to be the best spells in the game, because you've already spent all of your time leveling up early game spells, and it's just not practical to start working on a spell from scratch all over again. Some of the high level spells are bugged anyway, like Ultima, which is even written into the storyline as the ultimate magic force in the world. There's even a lengthy, and I do mean lengthy, mainline story quest to obtain it, only to discover that it doesn't even function properly. That is a huge momentum killer. It really is unfortunate that the developers didn't give themselves time to fix all of the bugs in this game. In the original version, there's a really easy way to cheat the system and develop your characters much faster than was ever intended. Because of this, patient players can upgrade their characters on a colossal scale with only an hour or so of grinding. The fact that this is possible is a testament to the fact that the game had not been properly tested before being greenlighted for release. And that's a shame, because to me it really taints the brilliance of the whole thing. That's not where it ends though. There are also several bosses, almost every boss in the game actually, that the developers forgot to give immunity to matter elemental status effects and instant death spells. You know, like Minnie, and Toad, and Death? Now, to me, this is an unforgivable oversight, because these bosses are meant to be challenging. They're meant to make the player think and strategize. But unfortunately, all you have to do is level up your Minnie or Toad spell sufficiently, and you can beat the highest level bosses in the game with one spell cast. That's really disappointing, and there's no excuse for it. However, there are some really cool new elements that added a layer of depth to the strategy of battles. Final Fantasy II allows you to carry extra equipment into battle via 2 item slots for each character. This makes it possible to switch out which weapon you have equipped in the middle of battle. Because many weapons have attribute penalties applied to them, it makes it necessary to remove them in given situations if you really need a certain spell to work. Some weapons are also more effective against specific enemies, or cause status ailments that are essential to defeating others. It's a small, seemingly simple feature, but it actually added a lot of depth to the battle system. Final Fantasy II was a very ambitious game. The developers decided not to take the safe route by simply releasing the same game as its predecessor, with a few new characters and a slightly altered storyline. It was an entirely new experience, and one that was driven by many brilliant ideas. Unfortunately, the short development time feels very apparent, and many of the game's ideas failed due to sloppy programming. While Final Fantasy II had tremendous potential, it failed to reach it ultimately, which left me feeling a bit disappointed. My final score for the game is 3 Mini Furions out of 5.